Hello and welcome everybody to the Stay Ahead of Ransomware episode November. Welcome. My name is Mary DeGrazia. I am a SANS instructor where I teach Forensics 500 and 528, which is our ransomware and extortion case or class. And yes, Ryan is not here with me today, but I have the wonderful Eric Taylor joining us. He was actually on last month with us, and we enjoyed it so much. And Ryan was out this week. I was like, Ryan, can I please have a co-host, and can it please be Eric? So Eric is joining us today, and then just real quick. To kick things off in chat, if you can just let us know where you are joining in from today. Like for me, it's before lunch. I'm out in Arizona. We don't observe daylight savings time, so everybody in the world, or at least in the US, shifted around me. So my calendar got a little bit wacky. And while you're kind of coming into the chat and letting us know where you're from, I will turn it over to Eric to give an introduction about himself.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And again, such an honor to be here. Greatly, I do appreciate it. Being able to try to fill in the big shoes of Mr. Ryan. Hello, my name is Eric Taylor. I am the owner and chief forensic operator here at Barricade Cyber. And I'm just avid SANS lover. We've got 4 GX certifications. And we're literally going to talk to one of my favorite people in the world for one of my latest GX certifications, cloud. And I really, really love this conversation we're about to have.
Yes, absolutely. And, I work at IDX. We call it the day job, when we're teaching at SANS. My day job is at IDX doing digital forensics and incident response. But the cloud, I've been doing forensics for 15 years now. And when I first started, there really wasn't the concept of the cloud anything like we had it today, right? It was like I had to send some files to somebody. I might put them in Dropbox. And that was the extent of it. And now, a lot of us are living, breathing, doing all of our daily tasks out of the cloud. So we are so excited to have Megan Roddie-Fonseca. And I even asked you how to pronounce that beforehand. I knew I was going to have issues because I just always call you Megan when I see you. So we have Megan joining us today, and I'll let her give her background, but she's definitely, when it comes to cloud forensics, one of the great experts out there that's just gonna, we're gonna chat with her today and find all about the cloud. So Megan,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Megan Roddie-Fonseca, I am the co-author and instructor of Forensics 509, which is our cloud digital forensics and IR course. So we'll hear a bit about cloud ransomware today. That's the idea of our topic. My day job, as Marie said, is working as a detection engineer at Datadog. I see a few of my colleagues chiming in the chat. So hello to all my Datadog colleagues. I do a bit of literally everything. So I'm excited to see where this conversation goes today. And I really appreciate being invited on.
Thank you so much for joining us. And Megan, as I know we've chatted and I've seen you at, when we're teaching together and at conferences, but I was looking at your bio, taking an in-depth look at it, and you actually had, like a couple of degrees by the time you were 21, like you started college when you were 14. And
Yeah.
I don't even want to talk about what I was doing when I was 21, right? So I saw that and I was floored. So that's
I started in doing mathematics, which was a dumb idea. I was 14, so they said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I like math." And by the time I was 18, I was regretting that decision, but too far into a degree to change my mind. But luckily, when I got to the master's degree, I had more of a clear path. Went into digital forensics. And even ended up getting a second master's degree from SANS. I highly recommend the SANS master's program. I like to shout that out any chance I get.
That is fantastic. And I think, I was pretty math heavy in school as well, I think, and I wouldn't be surprised, and I'd be curious to see what people say in the chat too. I think it's that logical flow that we like.
Yep.
And I think that we see that a lot of time in investigations too, like problem solving, the algorithms. I think that mindset goes hand in hand with the industry. So
yeah, that's definitely what drew me to it. So I didn't really know what exactly I wanted to do. So it was a good anything that aligned with how my brain works and my interests.
Yeah. So can you kind of talk about, what first pulled you into cybersecurity? You talked about the fact that you were into math, you were regretting it. How did
Yeah.
how did you end up kind of where you're at today?
Yeah, so I got my math degree from Sam Houston State University. And at the time, they had like one of the only digital forensics programs in the state. And I was minoring in computer science. So I found out about the program and I was like, okay, this seems interesting. I didn't have a big background in computers or programming like a lot of people do, and had going into that program, but it sounded like very interesting work. I thought I was going to take the route of like working with like federal government investigations, like FBI. I'm going to be analyzing criminal evidence and testifying and stuff like that. That seemed very interesting to me. I did a local internship around that. But while I was in that program, I actually got the opportunity to do a summer internship with the Texas Department of Public Safety. And I kind of just signed up. I wasn't really sure exactly the work I'd be doing. And that ended up moving more towards the like cybersecurity incident response space. It was like a SOC analyst position. So when I got there, I enjoyed that kind of work, kind of the day-to-day SOC work. And so I ended up landing a full-time position at the end of that internship, stayed there a few years, realized that I didn't actually want to work for the government. I think that takes a special kind of person. It's much different than working in the private sector. From there, I thought I wanted to go into incident response. So I started applying for incident response jobs. And IBM was like, well, we don't feel like you're a fit for the IR position you applied for, but what do you think about Intel? And I was like, okay, never thought of that, but let me check it out. So I got an Intel position, stayed there for 2-3 years, changed my mind on that path, wanted to get more technical. So I moved to a security engineering, detection engineering position. And I've been in that since. I'm doing a lot more threat hunt now. I guess I get bored easy. I tend to hop around these different specialties. It helps me learn a lot, but I've been enjoying doing detection engineering for a while now.
That's fantastic. And just a quick reminder to the audience, if you have any questions, about what we're talking about or for Megan, please put them in the chat. We'll be monitoring and taking a look at it. And Megan, I love how you discussed that because I feel like a lot of people, I think there's this expectation that you go to school, you end up going and getting a degree in what you're going to go into. And I think a lot of us in this industry kind of find ourselves going in and out of different positions until we kind of find that thing that really grabs us. And like you said, I think what I love about the field is it's constantly changing, it's evolving, and you mentioned kind of getting bored, right? It's nice to have these new things to look at and to learn and to challenge yourself. So thanks for sharing your background with us.
Yeah. Anytime someone says I want to get into cyber, I'm like, well, what do you want to get into? And the answer is either red teaming because that's the cool thing they've heard about on the internet, or like, what do you mean? What part of cyber? And I'm like, oh, you've got many, many specialties you can choose from. So it's a fun journey.
It looks cool on TV.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So Megan, I know everybody's journey in cyber is different. How did you, going down this path, I mean, you stated in here that, you went through different industries and different specialties, but how did you keep the overall focus and know this is what you wanted? You wanted to be in cyber, but keeping that due diligence to see it to the end and not just throw your hands up. Because I know a lot of people, they get frustrated and it's like, oh, this isn't for me, and just walk away. How did you keep that mentality and that drive until you found where you wanted to call home, so to speak?
Yeah, I think part of what helped honestly was early in my career going to like a lot of conferences like B-sides or SANS events. And like, so I had exposure to like, here's all these different topics and here's all these different people. And I love the people and I love the conversations I got to have with each person about different topics. Like, there's nothing I like better than getting in like an in-depth technical conversation with people, because I'd say my day-to-day life, I'm not really surrounded by the same kind of people I meet in cyber. So it gave me something that I don't get day to day, that I like knew I wanted to be with these people and have these things. So I really think community was honestly a big part of it. Um, and again, like things like just reading blog posts, I always found something that interested me. There's always something to catch my attention.
But Megan, so kind of, transitioning from, our conversation about your background and everything, what do you think, when it comes to, and how I mentioned I used to do, not used to do, I mean, I do it, like forensics, host-based
Yeah.
forensics. What do you perceive as one of the biggest challenges that organizations face, but when it comes to kind of making that transition into doing cloud forensics? So maybe they're putting together their procedures and their policies, and now they're having to start to think about, okay, how do we address these things up in the cloud? What do you perceive, as their biggest
Yeah.
challenges there?
I think the biggest thing, especially teaching the enterprise cloud forensics course, is a lot of people come in thinking there's a very heavy anagalization. And I don't know what word. There's a word there. They want to apply all the concepts they've always followed and just stick cloud in there. But there's a big mindset shift when it comes to the cloud. It's very, very different than endpoint forensics. People come into our course thinking it's going to be something like endpoint forensics, and there's a meme I once had in like one of my smaller talks. It was like the Scooby-Doo meme of like, it's a monster, no it's not, and it was cloud forensics, and then underneath the hood, underneath the mask, it's just log analysis basically. So I think that, and then also the idea that the cloud providers have a lot of control in infrastructure as a service. You do have a lot of control, but the visibility you get is the visibility that the cloud providers are giving you and the tools that they are giving you. So I think it's just this mindset shift and understanding that you do have to have different procedures and different processes, and you can't just stick with the old way of things, because while maybe there's like, again, there's some like analogies you can make and some similarities in like the problem solving aspect of it, the actual approach varies so much when it comes to cloud investigations.
Now, you mentioned providers. When we talk about cloud providers, let's say I'm a company and, uh, I sat through the course after the last Deeper Summer, not this one, the previous one. And it's like there are full sections devoted to every single cloud
Yep.
provider and just the terminology that they use. Each one has, it describes things in different ways, just using, different terminology, which can be in and of itself challenging just to keep up with all of that.
Exactly. And like, the larger your organization, the more likely too that you start dipping into multiple clouds. So like a smaller organization, they may say for our cloud operations, we're in AWS. But at least at my organization and as many other enterprises I've seen, it's like, okay, well, we primarily use AWS or Azure, but then we have some workloads that run in Google Cloud because they have a better tool set for this. Then we have some infrastructure here. Or if you're a product solution based company, you might have it running in different data centers for redundancy. So that even increases the complexity. But I think one of the biggest challenges that people do have coming to our course, especially if they are heavily familiar with one cloud and not the others, is this complete shift in how we talk about things. It's very challenging as an instructor. Is we'll spend a day and a half on AWS. Then we're like, okay, now forget everything we told you about how this works because we're in AWS and it's completely different. So I think especially when you in your role are moving between those different clouds, that's one of the big challenges. And that's just like, we only cover AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud in our course, but that doesn't even consider the organizations running in Oracle Cloud or Huawei or any of these other smaller providers that will also continue to grow. So it's crazy how much your processes and procedures will be dependent on which specific cloud provider you're working with.
From your perspective, Megan, what are the top challenges that organizations face when they're trying to adopt any sort of incident strategy plan, especially when you're dealing with so many different multiple ecosystems in the cloud?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge comes from, again, a lot of times we're talking about this migration to the cloud. Unless you're an organization that has started our startup that has been around since the advent of the cloud and you started in the cloud, there's so many organizations that are moving from on-prem to the cloud. And what happens there is that you're bringing an incident response team who has been trained and has been working an endpoint and throwing them into the cloud. And that is why we have a course like Forensics 509, is because when you do that, a lot of people don't have the experience of the cloud. So talking about those mindset shifts, or even just navigating the AWS console or how things work. You can't take someone who's only ever responded to endpoint-based incidents and then throw them in the cloud and say, okay, investigate this AWS compromise. It's a completely different world. So I think that's where a lot of the challenge comes for the incident response teams, is when you're adopting people who haven't had that experience, especially again, when you have an organization that's operating in multiple providers, and maybe you did bring in someone who's an expert on AWS IR, but that's not going to help them when they move into Azure incident response. So I think that the talent, I will say that most of the people who are sharp enough to be doing endpoint forensics can get up to speed there, but it's whether the organization recognizes the fact that they do need that training and provides it to them versus just saying, we're in the cloud now, good luck.
I remember jumping on some of my first scoping calls. This is at my prior company, and like I said, my bread and butter has always been like DFIR, host-based forensics. That's kind of where I grew up in the field. And jumping on some of those first initial scoping calls when companies started to move up into the cloud, it was like, okay, what do I'm trying to do research on the fly, figure everything out, and like you said, I think it's important to realize that it's not like I'm going to go find shim cache artifacts up in the cloud somewhere, or VMFT. We're talking about IAM permissions and all of these type of things. So I think the investigative mindset carries over, but it's definitely, I think, a steep learning curve. And I also remember thinking, oh no, what's going to happen? Everything's going up in the cloud. I'm not going to have a job anymore. There's not going to be any more forensics to do, because I think at the beginning, the perception might have been, oh, the cloud's going to be safe. We're not going to have to worry about security now or securing our environment. But that's not actually the case. Business email compromise cases have just exploded because now the cloud is, of course, externally, faceable. You can get credentials and anybody can log in versus trying to, get into a network. So have there been challenges around convincing companies that, hey, look, you can't just open up M365 and think all the default settings are going to work and you're going to be secure?
Yeah, I definitely think like 5 years ago, that was the thing. I think it didn't help that cloud providers market it as this is more secure than on-prem. Like we're helping you secure it. Like there's all these controls, which is true. There are so many controls and so many ways that you can ensure you're secure if you implement that. And I go to back to the same thing of like, we take incident responders who were on-prem and now they work at an org that's cloud-based and they have to develop all these things. It's the same with your network engineers and your security engineers. They have all this experience securing traditional networks and on-premise environments. And then you're like, hey, we're moving to the cloud, so you got to secure this. And did you provide them the training and the knowledge that they need to be able to do that? Because if not, then they're not going to know what to do, because by default, no, the cloud is not secure. It's secure if you configure it to be secure, just like an on-premise network.
Exactly. So what do you, like when an incident does occur up in the cloud, what would be some of the common mistakes that you see, teams or people make then? And maybe it's from incident responders that, don't have a cloud background, or just maybe common mistakes, even though your normal team just isn't used to responding to an incident. So like in host-based forensics, one of the things we usually see, especially, me coming in as a consultant, is evidence not being, it's like, we're just going to wipe all the machines and we're going to rebuild everything. We had a ransomware attack. And I'm like, oh no, I need to look at, I need to pull data. I need to be looking at things. And because their security team is approaching it a little bit differently than we would as incident responders, right? So, what are kind of some of the common things that you see happen? Maybe a team is working on good intentions, but when it comes to an actual incident, it's like, oh no, maybe, that should have been done.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest thing, and I've given multiple talks on this because of it, is that one of the things that like even security engineers don't really focus on that is important to investigators is the logging. There's some logging that's on by default, but even the default logging, typically if you don't ship those logs elsewhere, that you're working with provider set retention limits. And then there's so many logs that you need to properly investigate that are not on by default. And so an incident happens and you find out you don't have the logs. You can't flip a switch and then get the logs that already happened. When I teach, one of the common things I'll do when we start going through the logging section is I'll ask the class, how many of you know right now which of these logs you have enabled? And I get maybe, 5 to 10% of the class will actually know. Most of them don't know. They're hoping when an incident happens, they have what they need to investigate. So I think that's one disconnect between like a security engineer and a security responder, is the engineer is focused on locking things down, but they don't have that they want to be proactive. They don't have the mindset of a reactive person of what would I need if these controls failed. They're focusing on hoping that the controls they put in place will prevent all the incidents. So I say logging probably is my number one thing that organizations who have a new IR team need to make sure they're prepared.
And I might be putting you on the spot here, but are there any cheat sheets out there that people can reference, or any resources out there that you're aware of?
Yes, I will get the links to drop. I did a series on enabling logging on the SANS blog. So it was one for each of the major clouds. So I'll have to get those together. But there is those, or if somebody on our, actually, I have them right here. I will drop those links. So that's collecting all of the different logs. And then there's also a course poster, which kind of provides you what's default, what's not. And I'll drop these links. It looks like our producers, who are super helpful, are grabbing some of those links. But yeah, I have a blog series on that, as well as the poster that kind of gives you an overview.
Great. Yeah, because I know that would be one of the first things I'd be like, all right, give me the details. What do I make sure I'm being proactive, give me the details. Yeah. Great. And then Megan will be posting a follow-up blog as well, right? After this.
Yep.
So we could probably include some of those links in there for you as well.
Exactly.
When we're thinking about, just investigating compromises in the cloud environments, what are you seeing as, the early indicators of compromise in your scenarios that you've been teaching and working with?
Yeah, so what we see most commonly, and you can pull up, shout out to my employer, Datadog, we have the State of Cloud Security report, and there's also the Google Threat Horizons reports that come out like every half year or quarterly. All of those are telling us that IAM is the biggest entry point, so identity and access management. And some of the most common ways I'd say are like long-term access keys, so like API keys that people create, they get leaked on GitHub or wherever they're grabbed and then they're used to access, or something like an over-permissioned role. So a threat actor might compromise a host running on cloud infrastructure, and they get a credential from that host that is then over permissioned and allows them much broader access into the cloud. So identities are the main way in.
So when you're, sorry, I had a break. Were you about to say something? I totally just lost my train of thought.
Sure. Well, I see a couple of questions coming in from the audience.
Yeah.
Probably take a couple of those because you're talking about logging before and how important logging is. And I know for me, for an incident responder, it's one thing when my client has all that logging, it's in a SIM, but one of the questions is, what is the best way to handle large sizes of logs during incident response cases for analysis? So I guess that could be either from a consultant's perspective, do I get access to it? Do I have them provision me an account to be able to do that? Do I have them export them out and I put them into, whatever I'm going to use to analyze on the back end? Or conversely, if I'm the company that compromised and I have all of these logs, because we know they can be overwhelming sometimes, right?
Yeah.
You have millions and millions and millions, and it's like kind of weeding through that and finding that needle in the haystack when it comes to the actual incident.
Yeah. So ideally, and this is the kind of thing that I kind of going back to logging configuration too, is part of that of when an incident happens, do you know where your logs are and how do you get it? Now, contractors, I love and hate teaching contractors because when I'm not teaching contractors and I'm teaching in-house people, I can tell them to go and be proactive and set this up. When you're a contractor, you're dealing with what the customer gives you. And if they weren't proactive, then there's nothing you can do about that. So if it's in-house and you can be proactive, you really need to have a SIM. You need to have a way you can centralize these logs. If you don't have a dedicated SIM product like a Splunk or Datadog or Wiz or whatever that's collecting these logs, then you can use, there's built-in tools in Azure and AWS where you can retain these logs longer. There's like Google Log Explorer, Athena and AWS, Sentinel in Azure. So you have all these tools. So if you can be proactive, set those up to collect these logs and centralize. Now, if you're in a consulting environment, it is also going to be case-to-case basis. I'd say when you're consulting, this is a procedure you need to determine. Some of your customers are not going to give me an account in there to go download the logs. So I really suggest having like scripts or a kind of playbook you can give them of these are the logs we need and here are the commands to run or the places to click to get those. And then they can provide them to you. Or you could have an account created, but again, have a procedure. What account is created? What's the least privilege permissions you can give to that account to get what you need as a security person? Because throwing in an admin account into their compromised environment is probably not the best way to help them with their security. So I think it's all about having those processes in place because it is going to vary depending on if you're in-house, if you're consulting, if you've got these logs in an external SIM or you've got them within the platform.
Great.
That's actually very good. You actually triggered exactly where I was trying to go, and I had a complete brain fart for a second there. But, through your courses and everything, granted, logs are very, very important. They're the crutch of anything when we're doing any sort of digital forensics investigation. But what do you feel can also help prepare organizations for that next big event and alert that comes in? Is there additional steps that you would recommend outside of the logging?
Yeah, I think in terms of technical configuration, logs is the main thing for response. The other thing is to ensure that your team has the access they need to investigate, because again, in an incident, every second counts. And if you're submitting tickets to get access to an AWS account within your org in order to be able to investigate, that's an issue. So like at our organization, we get all our AWS accounts, or sorry, all the security people are granted a security-based role that gives them the least privileges they need in order to perform an investigation. And we ensure that that role is present in every single AWS account that's created, so that when an incident happens, we have an account ID, we can get into that account. We're not wasting time reaching out to the cloud infra team and asking for roles to be created and assigned to specific people. So I think that user management and again processes, knowing where you're going. And then the second part is the knowledge side of things that we already discussed, of making sure that your people feel comfortable responding and aren't spending the first 2 hours of an incident reading AWS documentation to try and understand what CloudTrail logs look like. Even if you can't get them formal training, they should be spending time looking at a CloudTrail log and understanding what data is here, what can I do. That's free to like give them a sample log and, hey, what does this look like? Versus the first time they ever see a CloudTrail log is because an incident happened, and now they've got all that ramp up time they need.
Yeah, having people trying to figure out CloudTrails is definitely a problem. I mean, even for novice forensic, especially when I started diving into it, because I was mostly Azure and diving into, I'm like, what in the mess is this? But yeah, I know exactly
and the
what you
schema
mean.
changes per cloud. So it goes back to that thing.
Yes.
If you're working in multiple clouds, just because you've responded to AWS incidents does not mean you're prepared for an Azure incident, because you're going to be like, oh, well, let me look for the logs here. Let me look for this part of a log. And it's just not the same.
You mentioned the logging can be different. Now, I know, especially working like business email compromises for a long time, Microsoft wasn't offering certain levels of logging unless you were paying for it, right? And this is, I think we all know, this is how cloud providers make their money. They have different tiers. You pay for your storage. You have all this logging. I assume you're going to have to be paying to store that logging.
Correct.
And as far as the licensing goes, is there any like specific log where you're like, okay, this might be a premium log, but it's definitely, because for us, for the longest time, it was like what we call the mail items accessed, right?
Yeah.
For a long time, that wasn't actually offered with a normal tier. You had to, have the higher license in order to get it, but the information it gave you, it could be critical and drive the difference between whether you're notifying or not, which from a legal perspective was really big. So I'm just curious, across these cloud providers, is there, something where like there's definitely you need this log and it's actually worth it to pay extra for it, or just kind of your thoughts on that overall?
So you actually used almost the exact phrase I was going to say, of due to like legal requirements and of notifying. When you have storage, you'll see events at what we call the management plane, which is like a storage bucket or a storage account was created, but you won't see people touching those files. Now, for something like, I use the example of your website pulls in the PNGs and the different assets from an S3 bucket. So your static content is hosted on S3 for your website. You don't want the access logging on there, because it's just anyone who visits your site will access that bucket. And those aren't sensitive things that you're hosting in that bucket. But if you have a bucket that has your company financial records or HR records or proprietary data, anything like that, turn on access logging. And you can also log at different levels. So you can say, only let me know when something's written to there or deleted to there. So maybe there's some buckets where you don't really care as access so much, but if someone starts deleting data, that's a concern. Or if somebody starts writing in data that shouldn't be written to, that's a concern. But I'd say storage for sure is something that is worth the cost, especially if your bucket has data that, if exposed, would require potential legal notifications.
Yeah, and that's what I feel like drives a lot of investigations is that legal,
Yep.
what are we going to have to notify on? So.
Perfect.
So when we talk about ransomware, traditionally with our host-based forensics, that's pretty straightforward. They come in, they encrypt the servers, they leave some README notes everywhere. We have data exfiltration, so they might not even encrypt, and they'll do the data exfiltration, and then they'll do the extortion from there or the ransomware note. But it's like, hey, we didn't actually end up encrypting. We just stole the data, and now we are going to get you to give us some money for that. When it's in the cloud, how does the whole ransomware scenario actually play out in that? Because when we usually think of the cloud, it's not just a VM necessarily. It's like you were mentioning, there's different buckets that are there. You have access keys, API keys. It's kind of a whole different concept. So how does that play out? Or how does, if I'm an attacker and I have compromised a cloud environment, how am I going to make money, right, out of this situation?
Yeah, so part of the reason this topic came up with Ryan Chapman is because we did a podcast 3-4 years ago about ransomware TTPs. And at the time, threat actors were just starting to kind of explore what does ransomware look like in the cloud. And it basically, I kind of disagreed with how we kept calling it ransomware, because really it was just extortion. It was a bucket was publicly exposed and they downloaded the data and said, haha, we stole all your data, give us money. Now we are seeing kind of threat actors figure out how they can do encryption-based ransomware attacks. So that can be in storage buckets. Storage accounts and storage buckets, they allow you to apply encryption. So if a threat actor can basically use their own encryption key to encrypt your data, and potentially download it before encrypting it, then they have they can extort you and say, hey, we encrypted your data, we have the key if you want it, the same way you would on an endpoint. And the interesting thing is that attackers are finding ways to work with what account they compromise. So they might get access and they can't write to a bucket, but they have the ability to apply a lifecycle policy that will delete all the data after 3 days or something like that. Or they don't have the ability to enable encryption, but they can change the encryption key that was used. So they're finding with the permissions I get, what can I do with those permissions? So I think that's where a lot changes. There is, I'd say storage is still the biggest targeted resource when it comes to the encryption or ransoming in general of data, just because that's something they can steal and extort and you don't have access to. It's a lot harder to find an impact in other parts of the organization. So I'd say still storage is the biggest focus. Of course, there are VMs. They can mess with your VMs, do like destructive attacks of, we downloaded the snapshot of your VM and then we deleted all your VMs and deleted all your snapshots. So the only way you get that host back is through the snapshot. But in general, I'd say looking at the landscape, you're mostly going to see storage focused attacks.
That's crazy. So you mentioned the life cycle. They'll delete the data within 3 days. I'm just kind of curious, is that like, do they give you, they come in, they do that, they put that into place. Do they actually delete the data, or is it during that time frame of the 3 days, they're like, you need to pay us or it's going to be deleted, or could it be both?
So for that specific example, because obviously if they let them know that's going to be deleted, the life cycle policy will probably be said. That's more of an extortion situation, I'd say, where basically they have that life cycle policy in place. They let it get deleted, so they hope you don't notice. And then when it's deleted, they say, hey, we downloaded all your data before it was deleted if you want it back. So it goes to that extortion piece. But it's a way of, if they don't have those permissions to actually touch the data, but they can expire the bucket, it's still a way to delete something. And it also, like, these different TTPs like vary based on like the yeah, like I said, the permissions that they have. So they might go in expecting to encrypt, but they don't have those permissions. So what can I do? The other thing that they will consider is what um what what is the noise or the visibility of this, for example. So, deleting every single document all of a sudden might trigger an alert of like, hey, 50,000 items were just deleted. But when you look at something like a life cycle policy, if a team isn't monitoring the life cycle activity, it might go under the radar. So it's also looking at what's the impact and what are you going to see when that happens? How likely am I to be detected?
Yeah, we've been seeing a lot of cases here recently. Megan, please let me know if you've been seeing the same and have further insights on it. But we've been seeing a lot of AWS account takeovers using the life cycle, and they will literally take timestamps and say anything that hasn't been modified in the last 90 days, we're changing and encrypting those files and start working through. So they're able to essentially take any potential recovery backup snapshots that you have and get rid of those because the life cycle is now paused out. The company may have, a handful or a couple dozen files that have not been encrypted until that final one, but it removes the organization from being able to roll back the snapshots because they've only messed with files that have been not messed with in 90 days. And that typically in most organizations, that's about 80% or higher inside of the data set that's being used on a day-to-day operations. Do you have any insights and echo any of that?
Yeah, like I said, it comes down to the opportunities they have. So if they can mess with those backups or those version history, but they can't touch other stuff, like why not? Like at least try it if you're in there. So they don't get defeated easily. They'll work with what they have. So that's definitely common. It's also, you might get lucky because sophistication of these threat actors varies. So if you got someone who's not very experienced with these kinds of attacks, you might get lucky if they deleted all your data, but they didn't realize you had version history enabled and you at least have old versions of the files. So there's a lot to consider when it comes to version history. If you have like cold storage backups where everything's copied elsewhere, if you have certain permissions on things. I'm going to drop a link to the chat. If anyone wants to read more about these techniques, the link I dropped is a great article that talks about the different techniques, the permissions that are needed, and the associated CloudTrail events, and whether that logging's on or off by default. So if you want to look more at like what the ways that they may get around a lack of permissions, there's a bunch of different methods there of either the accessing stuff, either deleting stuff or encrypting stuff or just stealing the data. Because also you don't need to encrypt or delete it necessarily. If you steal the data and it's sensitive enough, that might be enough of a threat to your organization. If they get 1 million customer records, it doesn't really matter if they also deleted it or also encrypted it. If that might be enough to motivate you to say, okay, well, we need to pay them because we can't let those records get loose.
If I can piggyback off of that just a little bit and dive a little bit further into that.
Yep.
So in the ransom world, if you will, we see a growing trend over the past couple of years of IAB, initial access brokers, gaining access into environment, collecting, putting their RMM or RAT tools on there, and then selling off, because the more data they have and a stronger foothold they have, the higher they're able to sell that off to Acura, Hive, name threat actor name here. Are you starting to see that in the cloud aspect where initial access brokers getting in there, they're doing the lay of the land, the discovery work and all this stuff, and then selling it off? Are you seeing those type of TTPs as well?
Yeah, absolutely. The IABs are definitely in the cloud already. Very, very common. Whether it's they got access and they created creds and shared those creds, or they, like you said, have a backdoor in, or they get the data and they steal the data and sell it. Initial access brokers are that's ATTP, observed in the cloud, and it's definitely happening. Access is being sold once it's been obtained. And even if you don't have an initial access broker, there's so many initial access methods that are easily discovered. So like maybe it's a key that's linked on GitHub or an open S3 bucket, that even if an initial access broker isn't selling it, there's so much reconnaissance being done that you'll get 5 attackers exploiting this vector at the same time. So there's definitely that risk of you're not just dealing with one threat actor, you're dealing with 6 threat actors that exploited a weakness or that obtained credentials from an IAB.
It's kind of crazy. I know I worked just a one server web compromise once, and there were 2 threat actors at the same time, and they were actually putting comments for each other in the code that they were writing. Like,
that's adorable.
And put the code and was siphoning off credit card numbers and putting it out to wherever they were exfiltrating that out to. Then a couple of days later, the other one would come in from a different IP address and be like, "Stop messing with my code," and they were going back and forth like Tom and Jerry in the in the code. What when you're talking about multiple threat actors or just threat actors in the environment, what has been a typical dwell time that you see them in the environment? Because I know host-based forensics, that has been shrinking and shrinking. For us, it used to be a couple of weeks to kind of get from the time of they're in the environment to kind of work all the way through and then to meet their objectives. How does that play out in the cloud? Is it typically 24 hours, a month, 2 weeks, all of
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think it depends on your organization and your effectiveness at monitoring and detection. I see, at least the incidents I've worked, again, for an organization that's got decent visibility and response capabilities, it is pretty quick that they're moving. There's not this long dwell time. I think it's similar to endpoint. That window just keeps shrinking, especially if you're talking about people attacks that are being scripted, where they get an API key and then they just put it into a script and do all the recon and testing and poking and prodding itself. I also think because we're getting better at response, it used to be that we were poor enough at response and detection that it's like, okay, an attacker can slow roll their way through and start establishing footholds. But the more the industry adapts to detection and response, they need to get in and do what they want to before they get detected ASAP. They're not going to be able to crawl around the environment in silence. So I think there's definitely cases, especially if you're talking initial access brokers who are there to establish a foothold, where they can remain longer. But I do see a lot of attacks. They progress pretty fast to their objective once they're in. And they have to do a lot of reconnaissance on the permissions too. So once they find out what they can do, they're going to use those permissions however they can.
Yeah, definitely want to, if you can just kind of reiterate that, because just so people understand, what we've been seeing, and sounds like you've seen it as well, just to echo it, it's like when you have an IAB, initial access broker, that dwell time that they are doing, again, like you said, depending on how large the organization, how many multi-clouds that they have, they could be in the environment for weeks to a month before that access is being sold off. So dwell time is very, very important. One, confirming and or disputing that, but 2, can you talk about the importance, kind of going back a little bit, just making sure that you have, proper log times available and making sure that that's immutable?
Yeah, every single log we go through in Forensics 509, we highlight 2 things. There's 2 aspects of log timing that are important to a responder, and they're both important for completely opposite reasons. And they are retention time and lag time. So retention time, that's important because if you have a long dwelling attack, a lot of these clouds, it's 60 to 90 days default retention, 30 days in some places. So if your attacker has been in there for 2 months and you're just now finding out about it, and there was a 30-day retention on the logs you need, you're not going to know how they got in, which is not good, because if they got in and you don't know how, then it doesn't prevent someone else from getting in that same way. So that makes retention time very important. Obviously there's costs associated with keeping logs, but even if you can put some in cold storage, so for example, at our organization, we might retain logs for 30 to 60 days for quick querying, and archive off logs for up to a year or up to 2 years, so that if an incident happened with a long dwell time, we could re-ingest those logs and review them. And as I mentioned, on the opposite side, we have lag time. So some cloud providers, there may be a delay. One of the worst is Google Workspace. It can take like 24 hours to get login events, the most important events for determining initial access. So like when I develop the labs for the course, I'll log in and then I can't like actually finish working on that lab for another day because I can't get the log. And that's important to you because you, in an incident, if you're talking about an actor, instead of one that's long dwelling, the ones that's in the environment going right now, you might look at logs and be like, oh, there's no logins. How did they get access to that account? But then you check 24 hours later and, oh yeah, they did log in 30 minutes before I checked and it just hadn't come in yet. So lag time and retention time have to be considered. And that's one of those other mindset shifts that I talk about, of when you go and pull logs from an endpoint, the time that you pull those logs, it has all the logs that are generated by the system. In the cloud, you have the logs from the point that the provider gives you the logs. And so that's one of those mindset shifts.
It really is a shift in the way that you think from, transition into this whole realm. And there was a question earlier from the audience that said, is it fair? Where did it go? Basically, should organizations expect that, people like us in the industry are going to be proficient in Windows, Linux, Mac, and the cloud? Or do you think, to me, it almost kind of feels like a doctor, right? Like if I have a major issue, I'm going to go see a specialist for it.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned training. So when it comes to the organizations, would it be fair to be like, hey, Mary, you don't know anything about the cloud, but you need to go investigate this? Or organizations be prepared, if they are moving to the cloud, to make sure, that their people really understand it? Because it sounds, someone said, wow, there's a lot of layers. There's a lot going on here to be aware of, right?
Yeah, I definitely don't think it's feasible for every practitioner to be competent or you should be, I will say, I expect you to have competence in that you could do a basic triage in every one of those. And then from there, it's kind of like having a tier 1 and a tier 2 analyst in a SOC. Like the tier 1 analyst can review an alert and get like the first set of logs and be like, okay, well, I can tell that something is going on here. Let's escalate it to the digital forensics person who knows how to pull artifacts and do in-depth host forensics. I kind of see it as the same way of the people triaging alerts. All of them should be able to look at an alert and see the logs and be able to say, this is benign or this needs more investigation. And then within your team, again, it depends on the size of your team. If you're one person in a small organization, being your SOC, it's a lot harder. But if you've got a team of 3, 4, 5 people, what I find is typically the case is you'll have 5 people, and like one's really good at endpoint forensics, but doesn't have a lot of cloud experience, and then one has cloud experience in AWS, but not so much the other clouds, and then somebody's good at like Kubernetes more so than anything. And those are the people you kind of escalate to, of like, okay, well, I'm working this incident. I know something's going on. I've got these initial details, but I'm not an AWS expert and don't really know where to get here. Then you can lean on those people of expertise. So I don't think you have to be and we shouldn't expect every practitioner to be an expert in every cloud and every system. But we should have the expectations that they can triage. And then whether it's you need to bring an outside firm because this is outside of the scope of your team skill set, or you need to hit up your buddy on the desk next to you because he just knows AWS better and you could use some advice, then that's fine. But I think, competency, yes. Expert level knowledge, not necessarily.
Yeah.
Very well stated. I love that.
Yep. I think that summed it up. Great. Well, I think we're just about at time. Megan, is there anything that I see some great questions there, but is there anything that you want to, like, your final thoughts, or if you took away one thing from watching this today when it comes to like cloud ransomware events? Anything
Yeah.
you want to share before we kind of look to wrap things up?
Yeah, just emphasizing what I said before, not just logging, but the understanding cloud in general. Do not wait till an incident happens in the cloud to learn about the cloud as a responder. If you're a responder, again, you don't have to be an industry expert. You don't even have to be the expert on your team, but you should be able to go into the AWS or Azure GCP console and know where to go to find things. So look through logs, talk to your cloud security team, look at the accounts, know what apps, know what's normal in your environment. So, do we use S3 at all? No. Well, then why are S3 buckets being created all of a sudden? Things like that. So understand your environment, play with logs. You can learn a lot just looking at logs and looking in your environment without any formal training. When you come across something that you're like, I don't really understand what this field or this event is, there's documentation. So take the time, do that. Don't wait till an incident happens to find out you should know more.
Exactly. And Megan, coming up, where can people find you? What's next on your list?
Yes, I will be with you, Mary, in San Francisco in just 2 weeks. There's still time to register for my course. So if you heard all this and decided you need some training, get out there. If you need a bit more time than 2 weeks to prepare to come take my course, I will be in Rockdale in February. So I'd love to see anyone and everyone who wants to learn more about cloud forensics and response at one of those events.
Nice. And Eric, how about you? What's coming up on your plate?
I've got a bunch of webinars coming up. Just follow us all on LinkedIn. I mess with Ryan all the time. It's /ransomware. So I was able to steal it, make Ryan fussy about it. But yeah, everything that we're doing over on LinkedIn, just follow us over there.
Great. Well, Megan, thank you so much for joining us today. Definitely.
Absolutely. I had a great time.
And one of my key takeaways was logs, logs, logs.
Yeah, pretty much is the spiel of my course.
Yeah. Oh, fabulous. Thank you. And Eric, thank you so much for filling in for Ryan today. I greatly appreciated it so much. Always nice to have your input. And as for me, I'll be teaching out in San Fran, like Megan said, I'll be teaching the 4500 course, the Windows Forensic Analysis. So that's next for me. And then just kind of wanted to give a shout out to CactusCon that's coming up in February. That's something I know Ryan has been near and dear to Ryan's heart. It is a free conference. There's talks on blue teaming, red teaming, forensics, all sorts of cool stuff. It's out in Arizona, but it's a 2-day conference, family friendly. They used to have it at a Dave & Buster's. So it's always really neat. They usually have a kids track, like lock picking for kids and escape rooms and all these really cool things. So I just kind of wanted to give that a little shout out. If you're in Arizona, it's a fun little conference to go to, and that's in February. So I'll be out there. I won't be speaking. I just get to attend this time, which I'm looking forward to. So and make sure and join us next month, the first Tuesday of the month at 1 p.m. We will be back, and I believe Ryan will be back as well. And we'll miss you, Eric. I'm really glad that you got to join us today. And thank you, everybody, so much for attending the talk or the live stream. Thank you for all the great questions and comments I saw where everybody was tuning in from, and it's always exciting to see that our reach is global. Like, the community is so awesome. Everybody is tuning in from everywhere. So thank you all, and we will see you next month.